to take up your sweet time. I'll give it back one of these days. If I don't see you no more in this world. In part one we saw how the simplest kind of vamping just involved alternating chords 1 and 4, and if you sped up that alternation you inevitably seem to end up with train type sounds. And we looked a little further into that, added subbeats, and another aspect we covered also in part 1 was explosive pops. Let's move on from there. Now chord 1 we saw was the bottom 3 holes draw, and chord 4 was miss 1 hole, blow the next 3. So we had another useful chord is a draw chord in the same mouth position as that blow chord. So the 3 chords together would go. Now that's a very useful progression which has all sorts of applications. But with just that and the other techniques we've talked about, we have enough to talk about riffs. Well, of course, that's perhaps the best known riff of all time. That's an approximation to Deep Purple's Smoke on the Water, but it illustrates what a riff is. It's simply a repeated sequence of notes or chords forming the basis or foundation for a tune, and it can be a very effective thing in blues and rock, as I'm sure you're all aware of the various songs that have that kind of structure. Now the whole idea, of course, is for you to make up your own riff, but perhaps one way of doing that is to look at an established riff. So let's have a look at the riff that is the signature tune for this video. It goes... or at least that's one version of it. So let's pull that to pieces and see what's involved. The first part, those are those subbeats we were talking about. Then we do a couple of very short chords, not explosive pops, but certainly punctuating the beat. Perhaps one blow chord and then a draw. And then the last part of the riff is just the 3 chords we've mentioned. That's the whole thing, and of course you try and vary the riff a wee bit with each successive playing of it, just to keep the interest up. So the whole thing again. And with a beat. So, how do you make up your own riff? Well, we have a few resources already. We have 3 chords, we have pops, and we have subbeats. All you need to do is mix these up in different combinations and see what you come up with, and then let a beat sort of flow. You might do something like... do. all sorts of combinations. So you can make up something original for yourself. Now I want to talk about a very special riff. I've talked about this in other videos. It's the Jimmy Reed riff, so called because Jimmy Reed's backing band tended to use this substructure, if you like, for Jimmy Reed's songs for most tracks that he recorded. It's a very strong and appealing riff, and it's very simple to do with just the 3 chords that we have. Essentially it's the 3 chords going up and then back again. So now of course when you add a beat to this you can get different forms of it and put it into different contexts. So you might go so that's one form of it, or you might go and so on. Before I go on, I need to clarify a little the nature of the 3 chords we've been using. In order to try and keep the music side of things simple, I've been a bit slack in describing these chords accurately. You may have noticed that when I introduced the 3rd chord with the title, I didn't say what chord it was. It's actually chord 1. Well, how can this be? Because the 1st chord is chord 1. In actual fact, those 2 chords are the same chord. They are just different inversions of one another. So that means that in each case the notes are in a different order. So for the 1st chord you have a certain 3 notes, and the 3rd chord is the same 3 notes but in a different order going into a new octave further up, so the whole chord sounds further up, but actually they are the same chord. That's important as we go on, because we're now going to look at something called wide chords, where we just change the nature of these chords slightly, and we need to know a bit more about their makeup. So what are wide chords? Well, with wide chords we tongue block the centre holes and play on either side, and it's a great way of increasing the power of the chords that we use on the diatonic harmonica. So if we, for example, apply it to the Jimmy Reed riff, the riff was, but with the wide chord approach it becomes, it's got much more power. And what we're doing is we're always hitting the bottom note, we're tongue blocking the centre holes, and as we go from the 1st to the 2nd to the 3rd chord we are extending our mouth further along the harmonica, so we get that bigger range for the chord. But there's another difference as well. This is for the 3rd chord. It was, but now it's, and what we've added is that note there, that is the blues 7th. It's a blue note, so it makes it bluesy, but it also increases the power of that chord immensely. So in fact it is the strongest chord on the diatonic harmonica when you're playing blues. Great sound. So in context, for this Jimmy Reed riff, it just makes it so much more powerful, much more bluesy, and it's something you can use in unaccompanied playing. You can come back to this riff and just put it into other vamping as a bit of variety, a great resource to have. Now another little rhythmic asset to have is the run. What you do is to start on a particular note and then do a run down off it, a sort of a throwaway. So it sounds like this. There are also runs you can do up, but in this context of vamping, the downward run is much more useful. So in context, you might do something like, bit of icing on the rhythmic cake, you might say. Now, we were talking about wide chords a moment ago. Wide chords have another use. They allow you to use in a vamping context the higher reaches of the instrument. If you are trying to play draw chords further up the diatonic harmonica, it sounds pretty dissonant. Not a very pleasant sound, but if you tongue block those centre holes and produce wide chords, you get a much more dissonant, a much more consonant sound, I should say. And you can combine that, of course, with your lower chords and use the runs that we were talking about also, and produce maybe this sort of thing. Syncopation is the last device that I want to talk about in this vamping context. So what is it? It's accenting the offbeat, or more blandly, putting the accent in unexpected places. We've actually been using it subtly all the time because it's very intuitive, and if you're immersed in blues and rock, you just do it automatically. But here's a sort of a classic case of just really illustrating what syncopation is. You can hear the offbeat being accented there, and in your usual vamping it just crops up automatically in situations like so. That's our last resource. You'll find many other harmonica players doing other things as well in vamping, but that's the set of resources that I have. I hope you've got something out of it. I'm a voodoo child. I'm a voodoo child. I'm a voodoo child.